Valve made the world wait 13 years for a new Half-Life game, and when it finally arrived, you could only play it if you strapped a headset to your face. Half the gaming world was furious. The other half played it and went completely silent. Not because they were disappointed, because they did not have the words yet.
Half-Life Alyx released in March 2020, and it did something that very few games in the history of the medium have managed. It made an existing technology feel necessary. VR headsets had been available to consumers for years before Alyx launched. Developers had made games for the platform, some of them were genuinely good. But nothing before Alyx had demonstrated what VR was actually capable of at the level of a fully committed AAA production with one of the most respected development studios in the world behind it. 6 years later, the conversation around this game has only grown more interesting, because the question it raised in 2020 is still unanswered. Did Half-Life Alyx save VR gaming? Or did it simply prove that even Valve could not make VR mainstream? The story takes place between the events of Half-Life and Half-Life 2, which places it in a specific and meaningful position within the series' timeline. You play as Alyx Vance, the daughter of Resistance scientist Eli Vance, operating in City 17 under the occupation of the Combine. The primary mission involves intercepting a Combine superweapon, a massive structure visible throughout the entire game hovering above the city, that the Combine refer to as the Vault. Eli has been captured. Alyx is working with her father's old colleague, Russell, to find and destroy whatever is inside the vault before the Combine can use it. That setup is relatively straightforward by Half-Life standards. What the game does with it across 12 chapters is anything but.
The writing in Half-Life Alyx is the best Valve has produced since Half-Life 2. Russell communicates with Alyx through an earpiece throughout the game, and the dynamic between them provides consistent warmth, genuine humor, and occasional real tension without ever feeling like forced comic relief. Arana Smith voices Alyx with intelligence and emotional range that makes her one of the most convincing protagonists in VR gaming. The relationship between Alyx and her father, communicated through environmental storytelling and direct scenes, carries emotional weight that accumulates throughout the campaign and becomes devastating by the final act. And the ending of Half-Life Alyx is something that needs to be discussed separately because it does something to the series' timeline that nobody anticipated and that the community spent years processing. The ending changes everything, not metaphorically, literally. What happens in the final moments of Half-Life Alyx has direct consequences for the broader Half-Life story and raises questions about what a potential Half-Life 3 would even look like now. Sitting here in 2026 with no Half-Life 3 announcement still on the horizon, that ending sits in a particularly complicated emotional space for longtime fans of the series. The gameplay in Half-Life Alyx is built entirely around what VR makes possible that flat-screen gaming cannot replicate. Physical interaction with the world is the foundation of everything. Opening doors means physically reaching out and pulling them. Drawers, cabinets, and storage containers are opened with your hands. Bottles, cans, bricks, and objects in the environment can be picked up, examined, and thrown. This tactile relationship with the world is not a gimmick layered onto conventional gameplay. It is the gameplay. Solving puzzles means physically manipulating components with your hands. Reloading weapons means ejecting magazines, retrieving new ones from your wrist-mounted container, and inserting them manually into the weapon. Every mechanical action has a physical counterpart. The gravity gloves, called Russells in-game, allow Alyx to grab distant objects by gesturing toward them and catching them as they fly to her hand. This mechanic serves the same function that the gravity gun served in Half-Life 2, providing a tool for both puzzle solving and combat that becomes deeply natural to use after a short period of adjustment. Finding a well-placed explosive canister across a room, flicking your wrist, call it to your hand, and throwing it into a cluster of Combine soldiers creates a moment of improvisational action that flat-screen gaming struggles to produce with the same physical satisfaction. The combat is slower and more deliberate than most first-person shooters, and that is a correct design decision. In VR, frantic, fast movement combat creates motion sickness for a significant portion of players. Alyx handles this by designing encounters around cover mechanics, careful positioning, and resource management rather than aggressive movement. Ammunition is genuinely scarce throughout the game. You search every environment thoroughly for bullets. Finding a box of pistol rounds in a cabinet you almost missed feels like genuine relief. That scarcity creates tension during every combat encounter because going into a fight without enough ammunition is a serious problem, not a minor inconvenience. The enemy design is excellent. Standard Combine soldiers require careful cover usage and headshot priority. Headcrabs and zombies create close-range panic that VR amplifies into something genuinely frightening. The barnacles, ceiling-hanging creatures that grab anything passing beneath them with their tongues, are used brilliantly throughout the game in both combat and puzzle contexts. And then there is one specific enemy type introduced in a particular chapter that changed how a large portion of the VR gaming community felt about horror in this medium. Describing it in detail would remove the impact entirely. What can be said is that the chapter it dominates is one of the most effective horror sequences ever designed for VR, and people who played it at launch in 2020 remember exactly where they were when they encountered it. The puzzle design across the campaign is consistently inventive. Electrical puzzles require physically aligning components inside three-dimensional spaces while managing the rotation with your hands. Resin collection, the upgrade currency of the game, is hidden throughout environments, and finding it rewards thorough exploration. The upgrade system is simple but satisfying. Resin spent at workbenches unlock permanent improvements to Alyx's three weapons: the pistol, the shotgun, and the rapid-fire SMG. Upgrades include things like burst-fire modes, grenade launchers, and reflex sights. The system is not deep by RPG standards, but it provides meaningful progression that acknowledges how you play and what you prioritize. The world design is classic Half-Life in the most satisfying sense. City 17 is rendered with a level of environmental detail that VR proximity makes revelatory. When you are physically standing inside a Half-Life environment rather than viewing it through a screen, the architecture, the Combine aesthetic, the decay of the occupied city, all of it communicates with an immediacy that is genuinely difficult to describe to someone who has not experienced it. Valve's environmental storytelling has always been exceptional, and Alyx represents the fullest expression of that craft because VR allows players to spend real time examining details that a flat-screen player might walk past without noticing. The visual fidelity in 2026 is worth addressing honestly. Alyx was a showcase title for VR in 2020, and it looked extraordinary for the platform at that time. 6 years later, running on current-generation VR hardware with modern headsets that offer significantly higher resolutions than those available at launch, the game still looks impressive, but the limitations of its original target hardware are more visible than they were. Character models remain strong, environments hold up well, but certain textures and geometry details that were acceptable on 2020-era headsets show their age more clearly on the pixel density available in 2026 headsets. This is not a serious criticism because the art direction and the environmental design compensate substantially, but it is an honest observation about how technical VR standards have progressed. The sound design is outstanding by any standard. The audio in Half-Life Alyx uses spatial positioning with exceptional precision. Combine radio chatter drifts from specific directions. Headcrab movement scratches from walls and ceilings with enough accuracy that your physical instinct to look toward the sound is triggered reliably. The musical score returns to the atmospheric electronic compositions of the earlier games, while adding new themes that suit Alyx's specific tone. The sound design during the horror chapter mentioned earlier is used with surgical effectiveness to build and then destroy your sense of safety. The accessibility options at launch were limited, and that was a fair criticism in 2020. Motion sickness is a genuine barrier for some players, and the teleportation movement option, while providing an alternative to full locomotion, changes the feel of the game significantly. Subsequent updates improved the options available, but VR accessibility remains an ongoing conversation for the platform as a whole, rather than a problem fully solved. Replay value is moderate. The campaign runs approximately 8 to 12 hours, and the desire to return comes primarily from the quality of the experience rather than any New Game Plus content or branching structure. Community mods have extended the life of the game significantly, with some remarkably ambitious projects expanding the Half-Life Alyx world and even creating entirely new stories within the same engine and movement framework. The legacy of Half-Life Alyx in 2026 is complex. An honest assessment requires acknowledging both sides. It is the finest VR game ever made by a considerable margin. It proved that the platform was capable of sustaining a complete, narratively serious, mechanically rich experience at the level of the best flat-screen games. It also demonstrated that even a game of this quality, from a studio of this reputation, was not sufficient to push VR into mainstream adoption. The hardware barrier, the physical space requirement, the cost, and the inherent social awkwardness of VR gaming remained obstacles that Half-Life Alyx's quality alone could not overcome.
What it did do is create a permanent benchmark. Every serious VR game made since 2020 has been compared to Alyx in terms of production quality, interaction design, and narrative ambition. Most have not reached it. That is the honest position this game holds in 2026. Half-Life Alyx earns a 4.8 out of 5. The minor visual aging on current hardware and the limited accessibility options at launch are the only meaningful deductions from a game that otherwise represents the absolute ceiling of what its platform has produced. If you have a VR headset and you have not played this game, that is a situation that needs to be corrected immediately. And if you have been holding off on VR entirely, this remains the single strongest argument for reconsidering that position. If this kind of serious, honest examination of gaming history is what you are here for, a like on this video means a lot and takes 2 seconds. Subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Share this with someone who still thinks VR gaming has nothing worth their time. And tell me in the comments, did you play Half-Life Alyx? And if you did, what did the ending do to you? Because that ending deserves its own conversation entirely.